Tohle je velmi speciální díl Flow. Naším hostem je světově známý finančník a taky investor Guye Spier, který je známý taky jako muž, který si vydražil večeři s Warrenem Buffettem. Dobrý den. Welcome.
Ahoj, jak se máš?
Oh, that's nice what you learn in Czech language.
I just
First of
it.
all, I would like to say I appreciate a lot that you came here directly from the airport, because you just came to Prague. You're gonna be present on our Shifts conference. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope your flight was nice. And my first question, in fact, is connected to your flight from Zurich. Do you travel a lot on business? You must, or?
Yes, I do, and the flight here was very, very easy. It's a 2-hour flight. I'm delighted to be in Prague. The first time I was here was 1989, and as you can imagine, the place has changed a lot. The place feels more and more like Switzerland, actually, with very high-quality construction, with orderly roads, with well-constructed roads. But what hasn't changed, I would tell you, is the people. And you just have a feeling of quiet, calm, responsible, hardworking people. And that was true then and is true now. And people who are willing to trust initially. People are not suspicious in when they first meet you, which is really lovely.
Okay, you were a Zurich-based investor, the manager of Aquamarine Fund with $400 million in assets.
Yes.
That's right, that's correct. And you are also known, that's what I said at the beginning of our interview, you are also known as the man who paid for the dinner with Warren Buffett. I would like to ask you, was that your best investment in your life?
Well, it's amazing because that lunch happened maybe 15 years ago now. So I'm curious to know if in my career at some point that I will do something more important than that, or something that will take people's more attention. I would tell you that the last time he had the lunch, so I shared that bid with a friend. He was 2/3 and I was 1/3. The last time that lunch happened, it went for $20 million. So you could say that we got a very, very good deal at the time. And I think that the year before it was maybe $300,000. So if you compare it to what people were willing to pay later on, it was a very good investment. But I can tell you that for me, I learned an enormous amount. And it's strange because what can you learn in 3 hours? But actually, I'd never met somebody who was so powerful and so wealthy. And when you meet somebody and you're in the same room as them, you learn many things about how to interact with other people who are in similar circumstances. And so that set me up really well for all sorts of other interactions. So yes, I think it was good investment for me personally, even if you don't take into account the big rise in the cost of having lunch with Warren Buffett. I actually do auction a lunch off with myself now, in a way to clone what Warren Buffett did. And so I have a long way to go. It started off, maybe it was $2,000 or $3,000. And then last year, the auction was at about $20,000. So we'll see if I ever approach those kinds of levels.
So Warren Buffett was your inspiration in that way also?
Warren Buffett was my inspiration and my bidding partner, who's this Indian friend, Monish Pabrai. He started auctioning lunch off with himself. And I'm always amazed because it's such a simple thing to do, is to find what somebody else does that works really well and to copy it. We are taught in academic environments that we shouldn't do that. That would be called plagiarism. But in the business environment, to see what somebody else is doing and to copy it is absolutely fine. So Warren Buffett was auctioning lunch off with himself. And then my friend Monish Pabrai started doing it. And of course, after a year or two, I said, well, why don't you do it? So I started doing it as well. And what is really interesting is that the people I meet, I love the people I meet because you want to find out who's willing to spend $20,000 to have lunch with Guye Spiera. And usually they have a very good reason. And so they're really interesting lunches. In the same way that the lunch that Monish and I had with Warren Buffett, he was interested to find out who we were, who's willing to pay this amount of money to have lunch with him. So it's a smart thing to do.
And why did you do it? Was Warren your idol before? The lunch before the
Possibly too much my idol. So I was the kind of guy who would go to the Berkshire Hathaway meeting, and there's a famous kind of chocolate that Warren Buffett likes to eat called peanut brittle. And so I would sit there at the meeting, and when he would sip a Diet Coke, I would sip a Diet Coke, and when he eat the chocolate. And, you know, you have this phenomenon that when somebody is your idol, you want to kind of copy them. You have phenomenon where people even wear the same kinds of clothes. But I really wanted to learn from him in any way, shape, or form possible. I would have never thought to spend the money to find him, to have lunch with him. But Monish had the idea, and once he explained it to me, I realized it was a really good idea.
So, and what was the best advice Warren Buffett gave you? Because you said even during the dinner you learned a lot from him.
So I'll give you one of many pieces of advice that he gave us. He helped me and Monish to see how clearly, how important it is to, first of all, to listen to your inner voice, to live your life, what he called it, an inner scorecard. And so that was, I had spent a lot of time thinking, what should I do? What does society expect of me? I have an MBA. What should an MBA do? What should I do next according to the judgment of others? And what I had thought going into the lunch was that Warren Buffett did the same thing. And what I realized was that this was somebody who listened to his inner voice and did what he knew on the inside was the right thing to do. And that he turned out successful in that way. He'd asked the question at the lunch. He said, and it's a wonderful question, would you rather be considered by the world, known in the world as being the best lover in the world, but to have your spouse know that you're the worst? Or would you rather that the world thinks you're an awful lover, but if you have your spouse know that you're the best? And obviously the second one is better. That's a happier life. But how many people have it the other way around? So many people. But I had to be in the room to see he was actually living that way. He wasn't after the money. He was after making a really nice life for himself, and the money came second. And I had to see that in person to really understand it. And so for me, it made a huge difference. It gave me the confidence to decide to move to Zurich. I thought, oh, if I'm a Mr. Serious investor, I have to be in New York. I said, no, I want to go to Zurich. I feel like that's where I want to be. So that gave me the confidence to say, well, if Warren Buffett is choosing his best life, then I must choose my best life as well, you know?
So you started to listen to your inner voice.
And it gave me the confidence to actually listen to it, not just to pretend to listen to it.
How often are you in contact now with Warren Buffett? Because you cooperate with him somehow.
So I would say, obviously we had lunch together, and then he invited me and Monish back to Omaha. Once or twice we had lunch with Debbie, his assistant. I saw Debbie a lot. She would invite me to something. For about 10 years afterwards, he would invite us to a brunch. So there was about once a year contact in some form or other. But in the last 5 or 6 years, I send him best wishes at Christmas and maybe on his birthday through his assistant, Debbie. And he will send me a holiday card maybe once every 2 or 3 years, not every year. He will send me something with a very, very quick note on it. So what I try to tell people is that I can't say we're friends. He knows who I am. And the thing is, if I were to try and get more of his time, he has so many people who want his time. And it's not like he doesn't want to be friends with me. It's just that he doesn't have the time. And if I were to try, he'd probably say, oh, that's another guy who's trying to get something out of me. So there is some contact, but it's not like a close relationship or something like that. But he is really, really good. So, for about 10 years after the lunch, there was this Buffett brunch that happened on the Sunday morning after the Berkshire meeting. And at that brunch, so maybe 200 or 300 people there, the guy who sells meat to him, the person who runs the sandwich shop down the road. So he has this kind of loyalty of friendship. Once he decides you're in his life in some form, he may not want to see you every day, but he's kind of loyal in that way. And again, the lessons from that lunch kept coming back after the lunch. For example, I learned through that there's incredible returns to loyalty to people. There are people at the brunch who used to work with him, don't work with him for more than a decade, but because he likes them and they're dear to him, and they can't help him in any way. They can't help him find deals. but they're part of his life. And so that's something really beautiful about what he's created. And it taught me, I think I had those values in me, but it made me confident to actually live by those values, or to live more by those values, to seek to show that same personal loyalty in my life, because it pays huge dividends.
Okay.
But that's the very long answer. The short answer is no. I don't pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Warren, how you doing today?"
I'm happy for your answer. It's really interesting what you said. But let's stay a little bit more with this topic, Warren Buffett, if you don't mind, because
not at all.
there are another things that you learned from him and that you described on media. What is interesting for me, that's one of the things that you learned from Buffett is that family is important. So how important is a family for you?
So for Warren Buffett, his family, interestingly enough, we asked him at the lunch, he said that he considers, at the time Berkshire had 70 businesses. He said, I consider those businesses a bit like his children, and different children have different needs at different times. And I think that Warren went through a phase where he was extremely focused on his business and maybe less focused on his family, and it led to an arrangement which is well known where he was married to his wife, but his wife was living in a different city and he had a different living arrangement. And I would say that is not a model that I would want to follow. I very much would want to make sure that my wife and I are together living in one place. Where I really learned about family is from my wife. I have a Mexican wife for whom family and family relationships are over and above everything. So, and I can't really talk for Warren. I think that he's done a really good job later in life. But there was a period there where probably, who am I to judge, that he maybe neglected his family a little bit.
Okay, another thing that you learned from him, that you described, never take on debt if you don't have to. Is that something that you would advise to other people, not only to investors? We had a sort of a discussion about that at the lunch. It's amazing. I remember quite a lot. So, there's the one side is live within your means. But he sort of said, if a family don't have the money to go and do Disney, who am I to tell them that they shouldn't go to spend a day at Disney World, and that they shouldn't have a little bit of family debt to do that? So he was not entirely against all borrowing. And from a macroeconomic perspective, from a top-down perspective on an economy, the way you allow the economy to grow faster is to give people the ability, access to credit is what gives people the ability to act and to do. And economies which don't give you access to credit are the ones that don't grow as fast. And you don't give out opportunity. The key about credit is it gives opportunity to people who don't have the resources. So it's a complicated one, because I actually do believe in living your life without ever using debt. And Warren kind of challenged me on it at the lunch, but I think that he's basically in the same place if you look at the way he's lived his life. Although he did borrow to buy his house, but from a macroeconomic perspective, it's actually good to allow people to have access to credit. And it's very hard to regulate, because what you want to do is you want to say, borrow to fund things that are an investment, but don't borrow to fund things that are just consumption. So you shouldn't borrow to go to Disney, you shouldn't borrow to go on a vacation, but maybe it's okay to borrow to educate yourself or to buy a house. It's very hard to tell people that they should only borrow for the one kind of thing and not for the other. So every country that has credit cards has a certain proportion of the people who have the credit cards who get into financial problems. Okay, but I think I understand it. Not borrow money for going to a luxurious vacation, but to make a reconstruction of the flat or to study some school. It's fine from my perspective, but Warren also didn't want to begrudge people the ability to borrow to go to Disney, is what I remember from the lunch. But it's something that I learned about Warren, which is also very interesting, again, not just from the lunch with Warren, but with many people, so they will say one thing, but it's really important to see what they do as well, because sometimes they will say something for expediency, or because they want to be perceived a certain way, but actually they don't agree fully with what they've said, and their actual values are revealed by what they do. You follow Warren Buffett's principles on value investing and capital allocation. Can you describe it for us more in detail? What principles are these?
Yeah, I mean, I'll do my best. The world that Warren Buffett came into in the late 50s and 1960s was a world in which many analysts would look at the chart of the stock price, and they would look for example, momentum. And if the stock was moving, then it was time to buy. And Warren Buffett's mentor, Ben Graham, had kind of said, well, actually, no, we should look to the underlying business and see what is going on in the underlying business. So that Warren Buffett's approach, or the Ben Graham approach, became value investing or fundamental investing. I would say that today, almost all people understand that distinction, and almost everyone is a value investor. Warren Buffett's style evolved, so he started off looking for very simple discounts to a liquidation value. Then he started focusing on better businesses. I think that when I say value investor today, in distinction to then, I think that what I mean is, first of all, I worship at the church of Warren Buffett. I go to the Berkshire Hathaway meeting every year. I try to live my life by the same set of values that he lives. And I try to own businesses for a very long time and build better businesses and try and understand the underlying economics of the businesses rather than engage in short-term trading, engage in various different kinds of manipulation in order to make money for my investors. And what we see with Berkshire Hathaway is that Berkshire Hathaway buys companies and owns them for a very long time and ends up doing extraordinarily well. So that's what I would mean by value investing today. And in a way, though, everybody's a fundamental investor these days. It's become a lot harder to do what Warren Buffett did. The good news is that even if I do a fraction of the success and ability that Warren Buffett had or has had, it's still a very good life and it's still a very good outcome.
And why is it harder now?
It's harder now simply, I would argue. Now, there will be people who say, well, of course you're going to say that, but you know, and there are people who will say, in every generation, it appears hard, you know, and in 20 years' time, people will look back at now and say, oh, then it was easy. But I think that at the time that Warren Buffett started, there were very few people looking at the intrinsic value, at the underlying fundamentals. Many, many people were looking at all sorts of other things. So there was a far higher likelihood of finding something that was really, really very seriously mispriced. Today, every single person who has an MBA, who went to business school, can do a valuation on a company, and everybody understands you need to look at the fundamentals. So it's just there's just a lot more competition for every single possible investment opportunity that's out there. The only thing that I would say that maybe tips the pendulum in the other direction a little bit is that you have indexation. Many people buy indexes. It's a very smart thing to do to buy indexes. The indexes are a huge proportion of the market, and the indexes are dumb. They just buy whatever according to a certain rule. So you can get mispricings because of that.
Okay.
But, yeah.
So you invest your money in Berkshire Hathaway, and then you invest in other companies like American Express, MasterCard, Ferrari, or Bank of America. So what do you think are the best investment opportunities nowadays?
Today? Well, what your viewers want me to hear me say, I'll say it just for fun, is definitely AI, definitely crypto. You've got to buy a lot of Bitcoin. You've got to buy a lot of Nvidia. Or not. So, the opposite of that, in my opinion, in a way, the way the markets work is that wherever people's attention is, that is usually where you have things that are most fully priced and therefore are not good value. And where I like to focus my attention on is where nobody's looking, which is hard because everybody's looking everywhere. But I would say, for example, right now, from the West, people are very afraid of China. They're very afraid of the rivalry between the superpowers, between China and the United States. So American investors are afraid to invest in China, and that creates an opportunity. So I've looked more at businesses in China that I think I can understand. many people are afraid of India because, again, it's not the same superpower rivalry, but they feel like it's too far away, too distant. And I think there are some interesting opportunities, say, in India. My Indian friend, Monish, has huge investments in Turkey. I find it impossible to go to Turkey for all sorts of personal reasons. But so the key is to look where people aren't looking. And I'll just give you one idea out of Turkey, which people don't really pay attention to, but is an interesting idea. So one of the Coca-Cola bottlers is in Turkey. And that Coca-Cola bottler has the franchise for countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan and a whole bunch of countries in that part of Asia. And the growth is enormous. And many people aren't looking because they're all looking at Bitcoin and artificial intelligence and Nvidia. So I kind of look for those kinds of overlooked opportunities. I can tell you that 20 years ago, to use finance speak, I could get those opportunities at single-digit multiples. Today, I'm grateful if I can get them at a double-digit multiple, at a low double-digit multiple. But I have to pay up for those kinds of opportunities.
Okay, and where you want to invest in China, or you are already investing in some Chinese?
So my fund is it's about I would say 15 to 20% China actually. It's 2 or 3 companies.
Okay.
And we know that Huawei is a company that many Westerners, the United States won't allow Huawei to sell in the United States. Many different kinds of I don't fully understand it, but the argument is that if you control that telecoms infrastructure, you can spy on people. So that is not a place where I would go. By contrast, a few days ago in the UK, I saw my first BYD motor car. And so China is way ahead of Western Europe and North America when it comes to electric cars. There's enormous competition. And there are also some world leaders that are emerging. So my fund owns shares in one of those companies.
Okay.
In part because the CEO came to visit the Berkshire Hathaway meeting, so I got to see him up close and understand what kind of person he is. So, and the fund also has a couple of investments in Tencent and Alibaba, which are extremely well-known global businesses. And
okay, so let's go to another topic. Let's talk about your life more in detail. You lived in many different cultures. We spoke about it before the interview. You speak many languages. I wanted to ask you, how did this influence you in your life, that you lived in so many countries? For example, you were born in South Africa, then you lived in Iran, in Israel, in United Kingdom, now you live in Switzerland, in the US.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for doing the research. I feel honored that you would take the time to look at those things. And so I would say that I once saw an interview with Sting, the lead singer of The Police, and he told the interviewer, he was also a bass player, and the interviewer was asking about bass, and he said, I can play the bass guitar, I can play the guitar, but Sting said, what I really know how to do is to sing. I was really gifted, maybe still, at learning languages, and I love learning languages. I'm sorry I didn't learn more. At some point, I realized I couldn't make money learning languages. I had to turn my attention to finance. But I find it interesting that any place that I've lived, the first 6 months to 2 years is very difficult, and then I find my way. And I think that I think that we become different people in different countries, and we become what we need to be in order to enjoy life in that particular place. So first 6 months in New York, I couldn't take all the noise. But suddenly I found that there was a chess club nearby, and I liked the coffee shop over there, and there was my favorite Indian restaurant, and I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. And but what have I learned? It's hard. It's like you're asking a fish what it's like to swim in water. I can say that one of the things I really love about living in Switzerland is that it's a multilingual environment. Somehow I feel happy when I hear different languages being spoken every day. And I've spent an enormous amount of time in the UK and the United States. Those are countries where you just hear one language. You hear English, and yeah, maybe in the US you hear a little bit of Spanish, but not really. I understand that Basel is even a better city than Zurich for that. You hear many more languages in Basel spoken every day than in Zurich. But
sorry, by the way, how many languages do you speak, in fact?
One answer that I want to give you before I give the real answer is the man is asked, it's a joke, he's asked, how many languages do you speak? And he says, I speak the 9 languages and I speak English the besta. So how many languages you speak? I claim 5. So mother tongue is English. I grew up partly in Israel speaking Hebrew, French and German. I learned at school and I also have worked in French and German. And now my wife is Mexican and I hear a lot of Spanish and speak a lot of Spanish. But I wouldn't say that I could do this interview. I could do an interview in Spanish, but my capacity to express my words choice would decline dramatically, and I wouldn't be able to say as many things as I'd want to say, or with quite the precision that I'd want to say it. But I feel like I try to teach my children this, and anybody who wants to follow me in this, I think it's a good thing. I think any country we're in, we should learn at least to say thank you. Dziękuję, except the first time I said dziękuję, I apologized kind of close.
No, it's okay.
And I think that it's really
nice
important.
You try.
Ideally, nie говорю по-русски, I learned when I was in Russia. But the first words you say to somebody is, do you mind if I speak English? So be respectful and start trying to learn a few words in the language, because I think that people appreciate the effort. So
that's true. I totally agree.
But I enjoy it tremendously.
So as I told already, as I said already, you lived in Israel. You speak Hebrew. Does it touch you personally now what's happening in Israel? Because I saw your activity on social media and you post a lot of comments about it. So do you have some friends, some people really concerned about the conflict now?
How long do you have? So the events of October 7th touched me very, very deeply. There's an article by a woman called Dara Horn that I can share with you. Why Jews around the world can't stop shaking right now. And in a way, for me and for many people, it's still October 7th. Until the hostages are released, in a way, we're still living the trauma every day. And in a way, I almost feel guilty saying we're living the trauma, because what I've lived through is nothing compared to what other people have lived through. In my case, we had friends of ours who'd recently moved to Israel who came back to Zurich. She had a cousin who was killed, I think, on the first day. I have family that lives just north of Tel Aviv. It turns out just south of them, I'm not sure why, has received quite a few missiles from Hezbollah in the recent days. So yeah, it affects. I had planned next week to go to Israel with my family, and our flight was cancelled. I should have booked El Al and not. So, and then, obviously the reaction to October 7th, what happened October 8th, and the demonstrations was terrible. I would say that, and it's something that warms my heart, is that for some reason, I don't know what they put in the water here, Czechia is sees it clearly, and I think that it's perhaps former Eastern European, former Russia occupation. Here in Czechia, people understand how fragile human freedom is and how easily it can be lost. And so I deeply appreciate statements of Czech politicians in all sorts of public forums that are supportive of freedom and the right to defend yourself. So affects me deeply, and I could go on and on and on. Depends where you go with the questions.
Okay, I have last 2 questions because I know you just came from the airport and I don't want to waste your time. I would like to ask you about your book because you are also an author of a book called The Education of a Value Investor. And you said on interviews that you were very open in your book, that it's about your early career on Wall Street. You said it was like a little bit from the movie Wolf of Wall Street, that the brokers were ex-drug dealers and there were prostitutes coming and so on. Have you ever regretted being so open in your book?
No, I haven't actually.
because you were afraid about what's going to happen.
Yes.
That's what you said in some interviews.
Subsequent to that, I read a statement, or I think that this professor of psychology from Canada, Jordan Peterson, has said it many times: if you want an adventure, tell the truth. And somewhere at the time I hadn't heard that statement, but I had read Mahatma Gandhi's autobiography, in which the truthfulness with which he describes his life is you're kind of shocked at the truthfulness. And so I was inspired by him. I was also, you know, I got a publishing contract. It kind of happened in a way that I didn't fully, I was amazed that it happened. Now I knew I was going to publish a book. And I was so scared because I didn't want it to be a bad book. You don't have any influence over whether it's going to be a good or a bad book. But I knew the best chance of it being a good book was to try and be as honest as I could with the reader. I know where I was. At some point, I made the decision I would rather have been honest with the reader but lose the opportunity to work in finance because people say, we don't want to invest with that guy, than to not be honest with the reader and stay in finance. I kind of understood that that was the better way to go. And I think that, you know, Robert Frost has that famous poem, Two Paths Diverge in a Wood, and I took the one that was more difficult, and that has made all the difference. In a way, that decision has made all the difference because it enabled me, wherever I was, to seek the truth and be honest and not be afraid of the consequences. And that, in a way, is everything. That is the adventure, actually. So yeah, I don't regret it, but it was a scary moment. And you know, Marcus Aurelius said something which, for me, is, if anybody whom this inspires, I'll be happy. You know, he says to his generals, you want to be courageous. You want to have the virtue of courage, but you don't actually want to show the courage on the battlefield. It doesn't work that way. You actually have to be courageous in the world, and we all want to be courageous, but that was a moment when I actually had the courage to do it, and I was rewarded for it. So yeah, I don't regret it at all. I would tell everyone, anybody who's being inspired to be courageous, do the courage in small steps. So don't decide to go hang gliding off a cliff as your first courageous act. You know, your first courageous act might be to tell the truth to somebody where in the past you wouldn't. It can be in small steps. So.
Nice advice from you. And it's really interesting, the description of the book. I would like to read it one day.
Oh, thank you. I'm not, it's in many languages, but not in Czech, I'm sorry. Not yet.
I will read it in English.
Yeah, good. Or you can read it in German. You know, I worked on the German translation with it because I understood German, so I feel like the German translation is also an original. Okay,
I would prefer English. Anyway.
But just think of how much your German will improve if you do it in German.
Yeah,
you know?
That's true. Let me finish our interview with the last question. And I would like to ask you about another advice that you got from Warren Buffett. It is okay to have fun and enjoy life. I would like to ask you, what makes you... What do you enjoy in your life? What makes you happy in your life? Yeah,
well, that's very kind of you to ask. Just to stay with Warren Buffett for a second, it really was a kind of a moment for me towards the end of the lunch when I realized that Warren Buffett wasn't doing what he was doing in order to make the most money. He was actually doing what he was doing because he loved to do it. And I kind of looked at him and I said, you know, I mean, I admire him and everything, but I'd actually not Warren Buffett. I don't want to... I like reading all sorts of things. I'm a curious guy. Warren Buffett is not all that interested in reading about all sorts of topics. He's happy for his friends to tell him. And he just wants to spend his time focusing on making Berkshire Hathaway the best possible company with the best possible returns. That is fun for him, not because he wants the money, not even because he wants the external admiration that he gets, but because he just enjoys doing it every day. So that was really inspiring to me because I said, well, I'm not exactly like that. I'm maybe more like Charlie Munger. I like reading about everything. So what do I enjoy doing? I'm not a very good sports person, but I love it. I love to go for a day cycling, for a day skiing, for me, being in nature is just lovely. And I love discovering, learning new things. So I got very envious of my daughter. My daughter is now studying Russian and linguistics in the United States. And She started last year, and I got so envious. And I joked with her, I said, you know, maybe you can find me a dorm room. Maybe I can come and be a student with you. Maybe you can get me a library card. So I signed up to do a degree. I saw on the back of a newspaper a part-time degree, a master's in history, believe it or not. I really am enjoying all the studying that I'm doing for the history. And I have no idea whether it makes me a better investor. It probably doesn't. But just learning new things is an enormous pleasure for me. Less of a pleasure for me these days is traveling to new places. I feel like I've seen many of the best places in the world. I want to go back to those places. I don't really feel the desire to discover new places. Many people like to travel. But something that maybe is a regret for me, when I was young, I used to play the guitar, classical guitar. And I've thought about taking it up again for fun. You know, you lived in Berlin. I was blown away, the culture of music in Berlin. You meet somebody who's a serious businessman and you discover that he practices piano for 5 hours a day and plays incredibly well, can play Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto and these are just normal people. And so I think maybe would my life be richer if I had that? But my biggest frustration is there are not enough time in the day, you know? And I really do have to choose, and I have a really hard time choosing. I really have a really hard time saying no to things.
Because there are many things that you like to do, obviously.
And there's, you know, obviously the trade-off is, I mean, you can just do it with sports. You know, do I want to get good at one sport? Do I want to do many sports? I want to do many sports. Something that in Zurich, you know, you can swim in the lake. For the first 10 years, I didn't swim in the lake. I then discovered you can swim across the lake. So I try in the summer at least 3 or 4 times to swim across the lake and back. It's just spectacular. But then I'm a less good cyclist. I'll never be a good sportsman anyway. So,
okay, Guy, thank you very much for this interesting interview. Thank you for coming here after your flight, and enjoy the rest of the day. Enjoy the conference.
Yeah, thank you. And I am wishing the people in Czech Republic much success. I'm so proud the Czech Republic is part of Europe and is part of my life. And you should be really proud of your country, really.
So nice to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Naším hostem byl investor a také jeden z řečníků konference Shifts 2024, Guye Spiera. Thank you very much again.